Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
With you live today from the Maxilla Social Club, which sits very much in the shadow of Grenfell Tower, the building which, well, I'll describe it to you. It's a carcass. It's a scar upon the city of London, a scar upon our society. And until you see it with your own eyes, on foot, not driving past on the Westway, but staring upwards, the sheer scale of the tragedy that night doesn't really hit home, even if you've spent the ensuing 4 weeks talking about it. And as you walk the streets, we arrived here an hour or two ago, and if I thought it through in advance, I might have avoided the sight of children making their way to school, because, as ever, it's those sort of poignant scenes of normality that remind you how abnormal, how extraordinary the context in which those lives are now being lived has become. And today we'll have a look at what has become of those lives and perhaps what the future holds. Thank you for your company. We'll be here from until 1 o'clock, and I don't imagine we'll be talking about anything else in the interim. If you want to join in, if anything that you hear on the programme today prompts you to want to pick up the phone, you know that there will always be a welcoming ear at this end of the line. The number, as ever, remains 03456060973, and I will, if I may, intersperse the programme with some of my own impressions and some of my own still forming responses to the reality as opposed to the reports of this tragedy. Somebody who has been immersed in the reality of the tragedy pretty much since it began is the recently installed Member of Parliament for this constituency, Emma Dent-Coad, who is with me at the Maxilla Social Club. And Emma, I suppose we should begin by asking whether the word progress can be applied to any of the areas of response yet. Last time we spoke to you last week, it was, well, it probably didn't apply to the response of Kensington and Chelsea Council, the response of central government. The only real progress had been made by volunteers and local groups.
Yep, absolutely. And I don't think we've got very much further this week, to be honest. We're still getting phone calls of people who haven't been allocated any kind of housing at all. They're sitting in hotels waiting to be, even temporarily accommodated. Some people are saying we don't trust temporary accommodation because we'll be there for years, which I quite understand because that's the reality, or they've seen that among their neighbours. And they want to be, have somewhere they can actually restart their lives. It's still utter chaos. There are still people not being looked after. There are people in bits who are not getting the help they need.
It's a remarkable disconnect, because I heard the head of the council, the newly installed head of the council, after the belated resignation of her predecessor, insisting earlier that everybody in hotels had been made offers of housing, whether temporary or not, and for various reasons they hadn't been taken up. And yet the message very much here from people in daily contact with these people is that many of them haven't received anything of the kind. It's hard to know how to establish objective truth.
Well, the objective truth is the truth that we're hearing from the people who are affected, not what they're telling their new leader, I'm afraid. And we're dealing with casework. This is real life. People have been offered. One woman was indeed offered a home in a tower block, which we've been told hasn't happened, but it has happened. I know that because they actually came to us for help. And somebody else who's disabled was offered a flat accessible only by stairs and no lift. So that's not an offer, is it? What kind of offer is that?
Indeed. And of course there are other issues as well. I don't know if you heard our news bulletin a moment ago, where a young woman who lived, I think, on the 20th floor was describing a desire to resist seeking help. It's an odd sort of stiff upper lip type mentality, but one that is unlikely to help anyone in the long run.
I imagine so. The issue is that they don't trust authorities because of what's happened, and I actually get that. I really, really do. They need to find help from somebody they trust, but they're not coming forward because they don't trust it. And there may be no issues about rent they haven't paid or anything like that, or whether or not they were sublet. It may be nothing to do with that. They just don't trust the people who are supposedly in control, because they know the reality is that they're not in control.
How do you, it's a challenge for you and people like you, break down these distinctions then? Because authority, in the context that you just used it, becomes a sort of an amorphous phenomenon. It could include doctors, it could include social workers, it could include housing officers, it could include councillors, of course, and politicians. But you're a politician, you're in authority, according to most, a form of authority, according to most definitions of the word. How can you help? How can the community help people recognise the people who do genuinely want to help them?
Yeah, well, I think, I use the authority in inverted commas, because that's how people see people who are in positions of power but aren't helping them at all. And I'm part of this community, and most people know me or know of me, so they do trust me.
This is because you've been a councillor here for many years.
Yeah, and because I've lived here forever and a day, yes. And my children went to school here, so I know half the neighbourhood really, which helps. So, there are a lot of networks of people who've been working, campaign groups and so on, been working for years and years. They are trusted. People coming in who are being slightly disdainful or slightly alarmed or not quite sure what they're dealing with and haven't been properly trained. They're in positions of power over their people's lives, over the survivors' lives. If they're not helping, then they get lumped into the authority category, because they're not, they're people who aren't trusted. With power and no trust, that's how people see it.
And the backdrop is what explains this scepticism. The backdrop is telling the, quotes, authorities, end quotes, that Grenfell Tower in particular was a disaster waiting to happen and being summarily ignored. Yeah. Therefore, when the disaster does happen, the people that you'd been telling it was going to happen are at the bottom of the list of institutions or individuals that you might feel trust towards.
Absolutely.
How does that get fixed, though?
Well, I think we have to review the whole way that the hierarchies work, actually, in the council. I find huge problems with the way that hierarchy, the people in control in the council genuinely see the survivors as lesser than them.
You really believe that?
Yeah, I do. And I've actually seen this in the council, some of the comments I've heard over the years. They do actually see them as lesser beings. They may not recognise that in themselves, but they do. They are not equal human beings to them. So they can't empathise or sympathise really, because they don't see them as equal to themselves, or they can't put themselves in the position of somebody who has had less money and less opportunities and is struggling with their everyday lives. They can't see that.
And that, of course, is perhaps part of this slightly baffling mentality where some people seem to think they should be grateful for whatever it is they've been offered. Or
exactly.
That would only make sense in the context of some sort of second-class citizen mentality.
Exactly. They see it as charity. They think they're being given something that they should accept and be grateful for. It's not that, it's their dues. They are owed this. They had this taken away. They had their homes and their families and their neighbours taken from them. And they want their dues. They want their lives back.
It's an interesting phrase that they want their lives back, because until this morning, and I've been walking around for an hour or so and reading a lot of the messages, talking to people who are going about their daily business, but with a don't know quite what the word is to describe what I've witnessed. There's a sense that something profound has shifted. There's a different mood on the streets. That sounds inadequate. I mean, you have the physical reminder, the building looming above everybody, a black burnt-out carbuncle, but you also, you describe it. Well, how have the streets changed? The streets you've really lived on all your life.
Yeah, I see everybody living. They're living in the moment, yes. Not in a good way, but they're living right now for what's going to happen in a moment's time, or what somebody has just said to them, and they can't see forward. And
it's
they don't
impermanence,
want to
isn't it? There's a sense of impermanence.
Yeah, I think that's it, and insecurity. And that's of course bound up by a lot of love for people, which is amazing. But everyone's living in the moment. It's right now. What's going to happen next? They don't know. They're just trying to get through today.
And this, of course, is not just describing people who've survived the fire, but all of the nearby buildings, some of which are sort of architectural mirrors of Grenfell Tower. Some of the other social housing in the area is similarly cheek by jowl. And yet, you cross the road and you find yourself wandering through one of the newer developments where the buildings, the homes have been for sale at seven-figure sums. It's always been something I rather liked about this part of town, but it's beginning to feel rather incongruous.
Well, yes, indeed. I think that mix of the extremely valuable homes and the and social housing is uncomfortable. I would rather have something more in the middling.
Which it was like 10 years ago.
The council has been absolutely complicit with the developers in forcing prices up and making it more and more difficult for social tenants or people who can't afford private rents to live here. They've been complicit in that, so that they can't just throw their hands up and say, oh no, look what's happened, all the prices have gone up. Yes. Why should people be allowed to live here if they can't afford to live here? They have been 100% complicit in that whole process.
Which perhaps explains why we're finding it rather hard to find anybody from the current or the former council leadership to speak to us. Elizabeth Council, the leader, I know, gave an interview to one of the BBC radio stations earlier today. She's declined to talk to us. You were never a cabinet member of Kensington and Chelsea Council?
Oh, no, not as a Labour member. No, you wouldn't be. I'm not allowed to be.
No, but you are now the Labour MP, so
yes.
You know, who knows what will happen in the council elections next May, I think, coming up. But what I mean, do you know what happens in these meetings? I can't quite grasp, and I know I should be asking her this, but in her absence, you know, the council were writing letters, legal letters to the Grenfell Action Group, warning them to cease and desist. So that presumably conversations have taken place, and the woman who's in charge now would have been party to those conversations. Or do the most senior members of the cabinet act with relative impunity in these sort of matters?
Well, I've attended cabinet meetings, and the general public are allowed to attend these meetings as well if they wish. They'd find it pretty depressing, and certainly as a chair of the one committee they allow a Labour member to chair for 3 years, and I tried to present issues and to the cabinet, and being pretty much laughed at, ignored, disdained, just as they do for social tenants, even though I was chairing a committee, and a lot of the committee members were decent Conservatives who believed what I believed about the issue X, Y or Z. Even so, bringing it to the committee and they just sneer at you, and I've had that happen to me countless times. It's absolutely disgraceful.
You use these words like sneer and like second-class citizens, inferior human beings. How would you prove that to somebody sceptical about your analysis? Is there anything you can sort of offer to somebody who may be thinking that you're scoring political points? They may be thinking that you're indulging grievances that predate Grenfell Tower. But to provide them with the kind of the hook to hang your hat on that says, no, that these people, this particular council, this particular regime really does hold the type of person that lives in this corner of London, the type of person that died in Grenfell Tower in a form of contempt.
Yes, they do. They do. I've seen this over many years, and actually what I think what happened at Grenfell is just an example of that. I'll give you one example, which is on record of this was a meeting outside of the council, but the cabinet member for property and regeneration, who's since resigned, said at a development meeting in his own business when the people had come along to protest, and he said the village will not dictate to the estate, and that's how he sees people. There's the little people and there's the important people, and he despite the fact that he had held a consultation meeting, he said the village, the people, must not dictate to the estate, which are the important ones. And that is actually the mindset. Not all Conservatives are like that, and not all Conservatives on the council are like that, but many of the cabinet members are like that. And I found that really back into some weird feudal age. And I have a lot of Conservatives who are friends, you know, and they don't think like that either, and they're appalled at some of the behaviour that we've seen. And I'm afraid the new leader of the council is of that mindset, or that's what I see.
Okay.
I'd love to be proved wrong.
Well, I'd love to help provide that proof, but we'll have to wait for Elizabeth Campbell to agree to talk to us to start that process. Briefly, Emma Denko, I know you've got a very busy day ahead of you. PMQ's on the horizon, of course, as well.
And the Grenfell debate afterwards.
And the Grenfell debate subsequently, which we'll be covering on LBC. What's top of your to-do list at the moment?
I want to get people housed somewhere decent now, as they've been promised and as we've been told has happened, but it hasn't happened. Number one in their healing process and people getting their lives back together is to be allocated somewhere decent to live, appropriate to their needs now.
It's housing security, isn't it? There's a phrase that's used in adoption circles. They talk about your forever home.
Yeah.
When they find a home for a child, when they find an adult or two adults who are going to be able to care for that child forever, when fostering is superseded by adoption. Fostering could be the equivalent of temporary accommodation, but the forever home is a thing of enormous beauty and power, and it's something that the majority of the survivors of the Grenfell Tower are yet to have a sniff of.
They need that now, before they even start, and some of them subsequent to that are going to have mental health problems, but they're going to need that first of all.
Emma Denko, many thanks. I've said to you before, and I shall nevertheless say it again, whenever you need a loudhailer or a platform for the work that you're doing for the people in this part of London, you'll have one at LBC.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the time now is 10:17. The time is 21 minutes after 10, and we are broadcasting the entire programme today from the Maxilla Social Club, which sits Just a couple of hundred yards away from the carcass of Grenfell Tower. You heard a moment ago from the Labour MP for the area some fairly strong accusations levelled at the council. I should stress once again that the council are more than welcome to rebut or respond to those allegations and accusations, but it would of course involve talking to LBC, which at the moment doesn't appear to be on the horizon. I'm rather more pleased to be able to introduce you to two young women who are working in the aftermath of this tragedy. Cassie and Zoe come from the Urban Partnership Group, and Cassie, you're working with some of the children who live in the area, and some of the children indeed who lived in the building.
Yes, we are, yeah.
So, how come? Tell me a bit about how you ended up doing this and what it is that you're doing. Or you, Zoe, I don't mind. You can see, I've look, it's like a Wimbledon spectator. My head is swinging between the two of you. We're in a slightly prefabricated studio this morning, so either of you take up the...
I'm a local youth worker, and I've done a lot of work with the Urban Partnership Group on the Edward Woods estate, working with the teenagers predominantly in the area. When it happened, I came down just as a normal volunteer, packing and sorting and delivering.
What was it like?
It's like a war zone. This whole area was like it was just unbelievable, just chaos.
Because people were turning themselves into the streets with nothing but the clothes they stood up in. Other neighbours were trying to help but not knowing quite what to do. The chaos on the ground.
Chaos and bewilderment on a just huge scale. I realised pretty quickly that with my background in youth work, I could do something for the young people and the kids, because it was shocking how many kids and young people were wandering around unsupervised along Latimer Road. So very quickly we mobilised. We literally popped a project up in hours.
Who's we? When you say we, what do you do? Do you have a sort of...
Well, I work with them. I work with UPG project to project doing youth work. So I had an idea to utilise the Norland green space on the Edward Woods estate, because it's a lovely green area, which is quite rare in this borough to have that space, particularly on an estate. So I pretty much had the idea and asked UPG to back me. And grabbed one of my teenagers that I work with on the estate, and we went upstairs in the office and just started phoning people, put it out on social media what we were doing, came up with the name. Within half an hour, I had a team of 4, had a primary school teacher arrived at the centre saying, can I help? A child psychologist arrived, said, can I help? Then we phoned some organisations locally, got donations of footballs and art stuff.
But this was all self-generated, though. I mean, this was a vacuum that one would expect the council or the government, the national or local government, to have filled. But
absolutely, there was no filling of that nature.
This is the thing, and I appreciate that you've been in this for 4 weeks now, but for people who've only really been looking at it from the outside, this is the thing that I think is hardest to understand, is the absolute absence of authority, of organisation, of official help.
It's very scary to see that the lack of organisation and help that was implemented initially. I think it shook everybody up to feel so abandoned, and it was very unexpected. I think the people expected a lot more help, and I think the feeling on the ground now, the anger that the people locally feel, very much is embedded in those early moments. No, it's getting worse.
Because
the decisions that are being taken now just continue to be like poking a rod of fire at these people, stirring them up even more, because they're not having any control over any of these decisions. And I think that the community deserves to have a say in what's going on now, and it's been completely taken away from them.
So tell me a little bit about what happened when the people you'd gathered, the volunteers that you'd signed up, but when children started, when the interactions began between your fellow volunteers and the children that needed your help.
Initially, I think we were all quite shocked that the children didn't seem affected initially. It was like they were in shock, and we were concerned about that, weren't we, Cassie? That it was like
what does the shock look like, Cassie? Describe it to me, if you would, because it's not a world I know anything about. I presume you didn't know much about it before it happened.
Kids on the Green.
Yeah, so a child. I mean, what does shock look like?
There are no words to describe it, really.
Okay.
For myself, I live on the estate. That day that I came across Kids on the Green, I was trying to get the children out of the area, because obviously in all of the local parks it was so congested here. So we took a walk further out of the area and came across Kids on the Green. and it's been an amazing place for them to be.
So the children you look after normally?
My children, myself as well, and a lot of children from the local schools and things like that. Our local parks are not really accessible at the moment.
Yes.
One of them being at the bottom of Grenfell Tower.
Yes.
I know that the kids of Kensington Aldridge Academy, their school has been closed now, so they're finishing school at around 1 o'clock as they're dispersed throughout the community, so they have nowhere to go. So somewhere like Kids on the Green has been amazing for them.
Because mums and dads will still be at work, there'll be routines that can't be broken, but the schools can't stay open. And I still find it a little hard to grasp, a little hard to believe, to be honest with you ladies, that something that sounds so powerful and so important occurred only because you felt you had to step into the breach.
It's truly shocking. I mean, there were children wandering around with the masks that had been handed out. I mean, the parents were just as in shock as the kids, so there wasn't a lot of supervision that was going on. It was just bewilderment, and kids in groups just kind of standing and staring at the building with their little masks, and the air was still thick with, pollutant. It was bits of kind of ash in the air falling, and it was horrific. It really was.
How do you start helping?
Well, we just threw ourselves in at grassroots level, and I haven't even got to the other side of the tower. For the past 4 weeks, we've been so busy here, I haven't even walked around the other side. I have to say a big thank you to the community and the volunteers. We've been absolutely overwhelmed. We've had people from all walks of life, kids entertainers, child psychologists. We've got a whole team that are just volunteering their time round the clock. We've got a strong mental health team that are there every day. We've got art therapists, music therapists, people from the off-road circus, social circus. I mean, there's such a long list of people to thank. I mean, and we need to continue, if possible, to ask London to continue supporting us, because...
What do you need? What do you need, Zoe?
We want to roll through the summer, and we do need more volunteers that come from mental health backgrounds, kids entertainers. We need, in terms of physical donations, we need sports equipment, we need footballs, we need... boxing pads and things like that. The kids love to be active. We want to burn their energy off so that when they do go home at night, they're sleeping, because so many of our children are not sleeping. We're seeing a lot of disturbing behaviours that are sort of coming out now that the shock is subsiding. Lots of disturbing behaviours, bedwetting, sleepwalking, lots of aggression. So we're trying to get these kids really tired every afternoon.
Yes.
Arts and crafts things, hot food donations. We've been supported by a Sikh charity, Khalsa Aid, for as long as they could. They were buying pizzas for us and delivering them every afternoon, and that's important. The hot food donation is important because we want the kids to come straight after school, and we don't want their parents to take them home again to feed them, and then they might not come back. It keeps them there. More volunteers. We'd love a storage container company to donate or let us borrow a huge, how do you explain it? A big storage crate.
A big storage container.
Yeah.
There's a clue in the title.
We could put it on the green, and because we have a lot of stuff that we have to pack up and set up every day. It takes a long time.
Right. Okay.
That would be good. We have.
And how do people get in touch with you?
We have a Facebook page which is @KidsOnTheGreen W11. We also have Twitter, which is @KOTGW11 capitals.
Okay.
And
people can come through me as well, james@lbc.co.uk, and we'll put you in touch with the Urban Partnership Group, with Cassie and Zoe. I'm going to ask you a tough question. I can see in your eyes you've probably spent the last 4 weeks on the brink of tears, have you? It's a fairly constant emotion in this part.
It's constant, but I think when you're working on the ground, the time for processing, there isn't really a time to stop and process. You can't fully, because you've got to get up and go back into it the next day.
Where would these children be if you hadn't done what you've done off your own back?
Just wandering around. And I mean, there are things that are being sort of popped up in various centres, but these are all centres that are very close to what we call the red zone. And I think the point of Kids on the Green is that although it's a 2 to 5 minute walk from the red zone, once you're there, it feels very different, and it's an open space. We've got a marquee kind of covering the tower. Well, not covering the tower, but you can see the tower from part of the green. We tend to deliver on the side where it's not visible, and we've got a circus marquee now kind of blocking as much as we can of the children's visual of the tower. So we're doing what we can. You know,
you're doing amazing work, and I think you'll allow me to say you shouldn't have to. It shouldn't have fallen to you, this, should it?
I agree with you.
Thank God you were here. I mean that. Whatever God you believe in. Cassie and Zoe from the Urban Partnership Group, thank you ever so much. I shall repeat this list of things that you need throughout the day today, and well, the least we'll do is get you the storage container before 1 o'clock, all right?
Oh, wow, thank you.
Hang on, I'm making promises I can't keep, but I have great faith in the people listening to this programme, so if you think you can help out...
Sports equipment as well, guys. We've lost all of our footballs.
So come through me, and then because I think Cassie and Zoe have got work to be getting on with, so come through me and I'll make sure anything that you can help them with gets to them as soon as possible. james@lbc.co.uk will be the email address. Thank you ever so much for coming in, and good luck with the work that you continue to do. Where we continue to broadcast live from the Maxilla Social Club, which sits just in the the immediate environs of Grenfell Tower. I can't quite get past the starkness of the site. We've driven past it a few times, but to stand on streets I know extremely well. The LBC studios used to be about 400 yards from where Grenfell Tower stands. So all of the local businesses, the coffee shops, all of the residences, the signage, all the things that are so familiar, and yet when you return on a day like today, 4 weeks to the day since that tragedy unfolded, familiar is not how it feels. It feels utterly alien. It's this bizarre juxtaposition of the known in terms of the geography of the place, and the unknown in terms of what's happened to it. It is, even by the standards of a veteran firefighter, relatively unprecedented territory. I'm joined now by Matt Rack, who is the General Secretary of the FBU, and we'll talk in a moment, Matt, about the kind of work that your members have been doing in the ensuing 4 weeks. I know this isn't the first time that you've been to the site, but I want to play you a call that I took on 4 weeks ago today, actually, from a chap who gave the name Terry for reasons that you'll understand better than anyone. It's not his real name, but he had, well, literally before phoning me, he'd come off shift at about 10 o'clock that morning, having turned up at one of the first responders to the fire some hours previously, and he was, of course, due to return to work 8 hours later. This is what he had to say to us 4 weeks ago today.
I was at that fire from 2 a.m. this morning until probably 10 a.m. this morning.
Okay.
So, I mean, to be honest, it was, when we turned up, we couldn't see there was only one side that was on fire. But within a couple of hours, that whole building was completely engulfed. And it was almost like the town inferno and 9/11 rolled into one.
Oh, mate.
The amount of debris, flaming debris, because to get into the building we had to run the gauntlet of the debris, which the police was providing riot shields, so we were running a gauntlet every time we went in the lobby. Me and our crew were involved in rescues on the stairwells, on the way up to certain flats that we were detailed to go to from fire survival guidance.
Yes.
And we were just meeting people coming down the stairs in smoke. Don't know how they was breathing. We were in breathing apparatus, and we was literally carrying them down the stairs. But to the amount of kit that this job has absorbed from the London Fire Brigade, it's unbelievable. It's like a war zone there.
How long have you been in the job, Terry?
27 years.
Have you seen anything even remotely like this before?
Nothing like it, ever. It's unbelievable. A building could go from being a fire in a flat, which we believe was on one of the lower floors, to the whole building, literally 100% of the building on fire. Unbelievable. And what you were saying about earlier, about the fire spreading on the outside.
Yes.
It's called the Coander effect. It's to do with the winds whipping up the flames and going through open windows and stuff like that. Which is, it was a hot night, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
You can imagine all the windows that are open. I mean, I don't know how far our crews got in there, but I only went as far as the 10th floor. And what we see, there definitely will be, that toll is going to rise, what you can see in there.
I understand. I understand what you're saying. We're told they got as high as the 20th. Yeah. They got as high as they have now got about as high as the 20th. If you can,
say that, yeah.
If you can, and by all means,
I can't say too much, James, obviously, but I don't want to get myself in trouble.
No, I understand that completely. No matter
what plan you had to deal with that sort of fire, that plan was gonna fall down. That was unbelievable. Nothing, no plan you had, because there was hose going everywhere. there was one small staircase that everyone was going up. It was just like them images of 9/11. You know, we're going up the staircase and people were coming down in smoke, and it was unbelievable. I've never seen nothing like it in my life.
I can't. I mean, obviously, if you're 27 years in the job and you are describing it as unprecedented and unbelievable, then obviously there
I can't see how this is not the biggest fire we've had since the Blitz, not including terrorism. I can't see how this is not going to be the biggest thing that's happened.
Firefighter who we will call Terry, describing his actions, his movements, his responses on the... Well, while the tower was still burning, actually, the General Secretary of the FBU, Matt Rack, is with me, and with the benefit of 4 weeks hindsight, we can say, Matt, he was right. It is the worst we've seen since the Blitz.
Good morning, James. Yeah, it is absolutely staggering. I think firefighters all across the country and probably across the world have been looking at this incident utterly flabbergasted that it could take place in Britain in 2017, and the firefighters turning up, and I think there's been other press coverage of, the actual comments that firefighters made from fire engines as they first saw the incident, completely shocked. And it's still, as you say, looking at the building every time you see it, it is horrific, and it just brings home to you what a momentous fire that was. And I think Terry's right. In terms of the risk to life, there may have been bigger incidents, but in terms of fires that have involved people, I don't think we've seen anything like this in modern times.
And people keep referring to the era and the economy, the modernity and the relative wealth of this country and this borough in particular, and yet something unfolds that we would ordinarily have expected to see perhaps in a third world country, apart from the quality of the response.
I think that does strike you very starkly, yeah. In the early days, while the fire was being fought, we didn't comment too much on any of that, but this country has a wealth of knowledge on building construction, world-class knowledge on fire protection, fire engineering, fire safety. The fire service, certainly for a long period, is a world-leading fire service in the UK. So the questions inevitably arise as to how this can actually happen.
And those questions, of course, will hopefully be answered in the coming months and years by the public inquiry. But in the context of your members, that call there that you just heard, I think that brought home to LBC listeners that we were discussing looking at something on a scale that we had never seen before, certainly not on a domestic level. How do firefighters cope? How do they, because they're very tough people. Clearly they're the ones that run into buildings when the rest of us are running out, but you could tell in his voice, and I've spoken to some other firefighters since, that there's a struggle underway to, well, first of all, to make sense of the situation. Normally you can make sense of a fire, you can make sense of a tragedy, however horrible it may have been, and then secondly, I think the correct word to use is trauma, isn't it? Some of the stuff that gentleman saw, some of the stuff that other members of your union will have seen and done, well, they'll see it every time they close their eyes.
Yes, I think the shocking thing would have been that firefighters are trained to deal with emergency situations. That most of those firefighters will have been to fires in blocks of flats before, and the way we operate, we expect it to be contained within the flat of origin, we expect it to be contained within the floor of origin. There's therefore very well practiced procedures of how you deal with that, deal with something that is so completely unprecedented. One firefighter described to me that they had to, he was inside, he was on one of the floors in there, had to draw on decades and decades of experience, i.e. people, using their training, using their knowledge to think, okay, how do we deal with this in situations we haven't planned or prepared for, and making ad hoc decisions, altering procedures, ignoring procedures, breaking the rules. Yeah, I mean, the rules couldn't be applied, and I just want to be clear, we haven't made any criticisms of the London Fire Brigade about this, because I've put myself in position of what the hell would you do? Yes. And it's almost impossible to see how you would cope. I think that doesn't mean there's not lessons to be learned, but I think people did remarkable acts on that night. And I think the thing that really strikes home with me is the fact that I think they knew very clearly that those procedures that normally protect them couldn't be applied, and yet they went in, and people went into that building several times, and it's still quite staggering to me, and I've been around this industry for 34 years.
Is it wrong to be surprised, listening to you, having spoken to quite a few other firefighters, is it wrong to be surprised that you didn't lose any of your number that night?
I think I think we could very easily have lost firefighters that night, and the firefighters were. I mean, as people, I'm sure people know it's physically demanding. It's physically demanding to wear a breathing apparatus set once, to wear it twice, and to wear it 3 times in those conditions. You know, in many flat fires, we would take the lift up to the floor below the fire, to then walk up 10, 20 flights of stairs, and to do that several times in heat, assisting people. People were absolutely physically exhausted to the point of unconsciousness or semi-consciousness. So I think it is. We were remarkably lucky that we didn't lose firefighters.
Indeed. There's one sort of particularly troubling element to the aftermath, and it's something that I've come to a better understanding of being here today, reading a lot of the messages written up on the walls, and talking to Emma Dent-Coad, the MP for the area, who's explained the suspicion of authority, because authority becomes a homogenous blob, as it were, and you know, whether you're a police or a council officer or a housing officer or a social worker, you can see why people would perceive them as all being part of the same governmental blob, if you will. Firefighters in the past have been on the receiving end of abuse when they've turned up to do jobs. This notion of authority being the enemy is clearly, it's taken hold a little bit, and one of the big areas of it is the suggestion that there's been a cover-up with regard to the number of people affected. I mean, that's doubly difficult, because if it were true, it would involve the compliance of firefighters, either just through staying silent or through deliberately promoting untrue information. And yet, when you see the backdrop of suspicion, you can understand how people have been led to that conclusion. What's the best way to reassure them that the facts, as they're being presented, are completely true?
I can completely understand the suspicion that residents have, and people, but wider than the local community,
yes,
have about what's going on here. I think we've seen a complete failure of central authority. And when I came down immediately after the fire, and it was notable, the absence of anyone taking control.
I'm just going to pause on that again, because it's not the first time we've heard it, but every different person that tells me, the MP, the youth worker who was here earlier, now the head of the FBU, that it's the vacuum, a genuine, absolute, abject absence of people whose job is to look after constituents, to look after the borough.
This was a national disaster. I think there's a role for central government there, and clearly the local authority failed. It was staggering, but the local community did engage in it, you know, in an uncoordinated way, gradually got better organised. That was quite remarkable. Completely understand this distrust of authority.
And how do you well, actually, can you stay with us for a little longer?
Sure.
I know you're very busy. I'm just going to take some travel news, and we'll be back with Matt Rack, the General Secretary of the FPU. I do have my phone lines open. I don't know what you might want to say, but then again, I rarely do. If you feel that you have a contribution to make, I'd love to talk to you today. 0345 6060 973 is, as ever, the number you need in the immediate environs of the Grenfell Tower that is sort of burnt upon the nation's consciousness, but not really fully graspable until you're here in person. Even somebody like Matt Rack, the General Secretary of the FBU, has been talking to us about the unprecedented nature of the tragedy. But Matt, I want your help in addressing the concerns of many people nearby, many people in the community, that they're still not being told the truth, because the firefighters who were there on the night, and some of the details still jar, still send shivers down the spine. 6 bodies found outside the block, believed to be people who jumped. One of the firefighters we spoke to told us about a colleague being hit, but thankfully not hurt, by a falling body. And all of these anecdotal, again, as you've described, in the evidence of proper authority, in the immediate aftermath, in the absence of proper authority, these stories can get halfway around the world before the truth has got its boots on. So how would you reassure people still writing messages on the walls outside, still walking the streets in a dazed sense, still failing to sleep, that the truth is out? The truth is both out there and emerging further. There is no cover-up.
Well, I think we've all got a responsibility to ensure there is no cover-up or suspicion of a cover-up, and I'm absolutely confident that the London Fire Brigade would play no role in any such attempt. I think people need to think about just the practical difficulties that those dealing with this have. I met the disaster victim identification team. I've met them before at training events and so on. They're very skilled people, and what the stage that is at now, as I understand it, is almost meticulously, room by room, removing stuff, taking it to an area where it can then be forensically examined.
The word that stuck in my mind most this morning was the word sieve. They actually, that's the only word to describe the equipment that's being used. They are now sieving through the ashes.
Yeah, and I think that is a very skilled job, and it inevitably is going to take a huge amount of time. The amount of debris that will have come out of that building will be huge, and it will inevitably take quite some considerable time to do that. And I'm confident that we've got the MP who's campaigning on this issue. The Mayor of London, I don't see why he would have any interest in a cover-up on this. I don't believe that at all. So I think there are lots of people who will ensure that the truth fully comes out in relation to what's happened here and the victims of this horrible event.
It's odd, actually. I mean, while you're here, I'll run something by you which perhaps highlights the difficulties of people recovering, but also people seeking to help them. One survivor of the trauma has spoken of his dread of the fire alarm drill in the hotel where he's been living. So, I mean, these things are important to secure safety, and yet for this gentleman, every time they test the alarm, it reminds me, and I don't want to be reminded. Oddly, fire safety should be one of the few lessons that we can learn from this tragedy.
Yeah, and it's inevitably going to affect all sorts of people in different ways. That's the survivors and the firefighters. People react differently, and equally one debate that's emerged is the level of support that people are being given, both in the community and in the fire service.
Yes.
And we have to make sure that on both fronts people get the proper...
Do your members get the help they need?
I think that, there are debates around the level of counselling that was cut some years ago.
Yes.
In London Fire Brigade. I think they have put in place very good measures so far. They've been offered support from elsewhere, other fire services in the country in terms of counselling support, and I know that other agencies have volunteered to provide that support, including people contacting us internationally about that. So I think there are lots of offers, but...
Do you have a problem with machismo? Is it still perceived as something that seeking help is a sign of weakness when the opposite is often true?
There may be elements of that. There is, the fire service is quite close-knit, and,
yes.
and people will react in different... One of the ways that people will cope with things is by being with their workmates and trying to carry on as normal and joking and having a cup of tea and so on, and that's a perfectly normal way of reacting to unusual events, but clearly other people will react differently, and I think there's a lot more awareness of it than when I was working on a fire station, and there are a lot more professional services and professional awareness. In fact, the government recently funded research because there is a mental health problem in emergency services. Yes. In general. So I think there is a greater awareness of it than there was in the past. We have to make sure that those people get the support they need.
Indeed. Matt Rack, many thanks indeed for your time.
Thanks,
and there's always a seat for you here for the interests of your members to be properly represented in the media. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A glimmer of good news, if you will. You never let me down. You really don't. Within 3 minutes of introducing you to Cassie and Zoe from the Oven Partnership Group and that wish list that Zoe provided us with of things she needs to help continuing her work with children who, well, some of them are just wandering the streets unaccompanied in the immediate aftermath of that fire, not knowing where their parents were or indeed if they'd ever see them again. And within 3 minutes, one of my listeners has come through with a shipping container that they will hopefully be able to use. We'll make sure that situation is expedited, and when I'm back in my normal studio, I shall give proper thanks to whoever donated it. Very good morning to you. Thank you for choosing LBC on this morning of all mornings as we mark the fourth week anniversary of the Grenfell Tower tragedy by broadcasting to you live from the social club that sits in the immediate shadow of what remains of the building. And if you haven't seen it, it's as bad as your worst imaginings. You'll have to take my word for that. When you see it in close up, in reality, unfiltered by television cameras or car windows, it is almost unbelievable in its size and in the stories that it clearly masks. And those stories continue to unfold. They continue to unfold to my abiding shock in the absence still of tangible, palpable, proper organisation on the ground. We hear from the local MP that people living in temporary hotel accommodation are still not clear on where they will be going next. They're reading in newspapers that they've been offered housing and they are unaware of it. It's an astonishing disconnect, an astonishing state of affairs. I should have told you earlier that some of the children that Cassie and Zoe are looking after are being turned out of the hotels in which their families are staying. You know how hotels work. That's often what happens, particularly at the lower end of the market. You're not allowed to stay in your room during the day, so some of these kids are essentially being turfed out at 10:30 in the morning. And if it wasn't for the volunteers and the work that's being done by people who are operating off their own back, then Lord only knows what those children will be doing with themselves. And I just try and marshal my own thoughts. And that's the thing I can't quite process, is the beauty, the brilliance, the magnificent community spirit that has grown up in this part of London, a part of London I know very well. I'm not as surprised perhaps as some by the quality of that response, by the quality of the community. But it's tinged throughout with a sense that it shouldn't have fallen to them. It shouldn't have fallen to all these individuals, these men and women who are neither in the pay of the council nor responsible for the welfare of their neighbours, but who have stepped into the breach, left the vacuum, left by a council that has been at the very best derelict in its duties and at the very worst complicit in some aspects of the tragic aftermath. And that's a real problem, actually. The idea that although we applaud everybody who's moved to help, we can't let off the hook, as it were, the people who should have been stepping onto this field. It's well, possibly a little early to be wrestling with issues like that. Thomasina Hessel is an estate resident. She lives on the Grenfell estate, although obviously didn't live in the tower itself. I wonder if you recognise what I just described. This sense that it's magnificent to see the community pulling together, neighbours from every background, every creed and colour. There's, the mosque, the Methodist church, the youth centres, the social club in which we sit now. It's been a thing of genuine beauty, the silver lining to the ugliest of all the clouds. But it shouldn't be you people doing it.
Yeah, I agree. It's bittersweet. I think the only thing we are holding on to is the inspiration of the community, and that's fantastic. But it's also a reminder of the negligence and the indifference of the council.
Still, indifference is still the word you'd apply.
Yeah. I mean, we're still to this day having to argue our case when we reach out for help from them. You're far better off calling members of the real community, who are the volunteers, and asking them for help, and you will have it within the 12 hours, but also they're working off their own back, like you said, and it's not fair that we have to burden them with this when the council and the authorities have a duty of care over us.
Almost as if they remain outside, if they stay away from the fray, they cross their fingers that you'll sort everything out yourselves.
Well, it's even worse than that in my view. I think that they're actually now trying to suggest what is being done, but also take credit for it, when in fact there are things being done, but not to any credit to them.
So tell me a little bit about your life over the last 4 weeks, Thomasina.
Gosh.
Start wherever you want.
Yeah, I'm a bit... this shock is going away, so all what's left is the trauma and all these emotions, these confusing and conflicting emotions, which are just feeling amplified now that the numbness of the shock doesn't seem to be there anymore. And it's getting harder to talk about the event itself, and then there are daily concerns that are just getting worse as time goes by. My son, for example, initially I thought, oh, thank goodness he wasn't too badly affected by the event itself. However, since then, hearing the news, hearing people around them, he's had to be with me during meetings that we've held, so he's hearing all these stories, and somehow in his mind, wires have crossed, and he actually broke down 2 days ago, crying, saying, my house has burnt down, we've lost everything, people have died, and I had to take him back to the property yesterday to show him, no, my love, this was not your home. People did die, people did lose everything, but you are lucky you didn't.
So you've moved out of your home? But
yes, we're in a hotel at the moment.
But because, and how many people have been affected like that? People not from the tower itself, but from the immediate, because it's a very close-knit estate, both in terms of the people that live there, but also the architecture.
Yeah, exactly. So our water system was actually shared with the tower before it got refurbished, as they call it, or regenerated, and
but our water system, the boilers are under the tower, so we've been affected in that way initially. But the things have got worse. You know, we now are fearful to return to home because, A, there are issues regarding fire safety that we weren't even aware of beforehand.
Yes.
And also this recognition that the council are neglecting, I would say criminally neglecting, their duty of care to us. And so we don't feel safe to take their word that it's actually safe to return home.
What interaction do you have with the council? I'd love to offer you the opportunity to talk to them yourself, but they continue to fail to respond to our requests for an interview, even though we are obviously broadcasting live now from the very centre of the community. What interactions have you personally had as someone who was not, you didn't lose your home in the fire, but you have lost your home in the aftermath? I would presume that there'd be a daily point of contact. There'd be somebody who could keep you up to date with developments, who could tell you what the next stage would be in your return to your home or your relocation. What sort of interaction do you, as a resident, as a mother, have with the council, with Kensington and Chelsea Borough Council?
Well, I'm fortunate that before we went in, this whole incident occurred, I already had a key worker. So I actually have a point of contact, and you know, she is a member of the council that work on the ground. She's on the front line, and as far as I'm concerned, she has been amazing, outstanding, as she always has been, to be honest. But at the very beginning, when I was speaking with her, I was through discussion, she was picking up on really important points that she wasn't made aware of by the council. So she was herself, like the volunteers of the real community, finding information through word of mouth on the ground.
What sort of information?
So, you know, where we can get funding from to help us, because, you know, living in a hotel is really expensive.
So she wasn't getting that information from her own management chain. She was getting that information from the people who were desperately seeking out the funding.
Exactly. Regarding mental health, for example, you know, the official route, so to go through your GP and get on a waiting list, and this can take months. Through the community, we found access to volunteer groups again, who are sort of accelerating the process and offering services, immediate services. So, you know, you call them and then an hour later you have an appointment with them, and these are specialized, well vetted,
of course,
trauma specialists
who volunteered their services. We've spoken to some of the coordinators, some of the organisers of these.
And I'd really like to add, forgive me, but I was fortunate that I had a key worker.
Yes.
And apparently, regarding the survivors of the tower, everyone's been apparently allocated one, but my key worker has actually, when I was describing the frustration to her that not everyone has got one, she said, no, I can assure you we've all been assigned families. And I said, well then, respectfully to them, they're not reaching out to those families efficiently enough.
So the assignation could just be a tick on a piece of paper. It doesn't involve an actual
and
contact.
This is not good enough. Like, if you have been assigned a family, you have to go above and beyond, as the members of the community seem to be able to do, to actually find those families, assess their needs, you know, and really, even if they're pushing you away at a stage, because I've heard that people aren't ready to talk, which is understandable, but you still have to be there, and you still have to let them have your presence felt.
And so to know exactly where they are. I mean, that's the definition of unaccountability, isn't it? For the council to say we've appointed key workers, but for the families who need the key workers not to know, or not to know how to contact them.
And now regarding people on the walkways, for example, so
what do you mean by that, for people not familiar with the area?
So I describe it that the tower survivors, they're the key victims in this, as you know, as with the bereaved. But then there are sort of indirect victims of this, and myself included, and we are the evacuees, you know. And so that's how I'm differentiating it. Now, regarding the evacuees, many people, I know men, you know, single men who need support at this time, especially where they can't contact the council themselves or services themselves, because they're saying to us, well, you need to go through your key worker. But to get a key worker, you need to meet certain criteria, and it's actually not that easy. So there are people sort of lost in limbo and unaccounted for, you know, for that. I would like to say the forgotten victims.
Yes, and it's hard to put a number on them as well, of course. What's your life like? Tell me a bit about life in a hotel.
Oof. It's the third hotel I'm in.
And why have you had to move twice?
Well, the first one I was in was really posh and nice, but it was, but it just didn't suit my needs. It wasn't even too far away. It was in High Street, Kensington, but transport links aren't sufficient. I mean, I'd literally have to leave the area to come back into it just to get my son to nursery, so that wasn't helpful. Plus, I felt very isolated. And so I requested to transfer to where my neighbour is, you know, because we left together. We've been close since before this, and we kind of stuck together through this horrific event. And so they transferred me there. But that hotel itself, the staff were amazing and welcoming and attentive, but the room was very small. The food was not adequate for a child, nor an adult really, on a long-term basis, but especially for a 3-year-old. And then they moved him and left me there. So again, the issues of isolation re-emerged. Yeah.
Not your 3-year-old.
No. Yeah. Sorry, they removed my neighbour. So my son and I, we were again, you know, isolated. And then also my mental state was like very weak at that stage, and I wasn't coping and fulfilling my duties as a mother as well as I would like to or need to for my son's well-being.
They can be lonely places, hotel rooms.
Absolutely. So then I needed my neighbour there to help with the weight of it all, you know. So then I did argue my case. Thankfully, I had not only my key worker, but I also got in touch with Hammersmith and Fulham Housing and their family services, who have been outstanding. They
seem to have given a lesson, some of the neighbouring boroughs have given a lesson to Kensington and Chelsea, haven't they?
I mean, yes. I mean, I can't complain about my key worker who happens to work for Kensington and Chelsea, because she's amazing. But I mean, the difference being really, as a contrast, is they have the same roles in their profession, equally as professional and effective, but there's this element of warmth and humanitarianism that I really genuinely feel very deeply from the Hammersmith and Fulham team that I work with. You know, they come and give you cuddles, they ring in you, we're here if you need us, you don't have to come, but we're here. And they come to the hotel every day and they just sit there for an hour to see who wants to turn up for them. You know, it's really...
This is the definition of being there if they are needed, rather than being audited and the decision being taken that because we didn't need these people yesterday, we didn't need these services yesterday, we'll get rid of them, instead of asking, might we need them tomorrow? Yeah, and it's just being there, being human, you know, that is a real key thing. How's your little boy? How did he cope with going home and seeing that his own home hadn't burned? Well, I think it was necessary for him. It was very helpful. And it was an opportunity to explain to him also why we're not at home, and clarify a few things. And my key worker went with me because I didn't want to go back. I've been back. What was it like? You know, my mind tells me it should be okay, but I have physical reactions to it. My chest gets tight, my body starts trembling, and it's just a reminder, the flashbacks of the evening. Even talking about it now is really difficult. So it was really tough, but I had to do it for my son, and I had the support, and we didn't stay long. Thomasina, thank you so much. Thomasina Hessel, who lives or lived on the Grenfell estate. Actually, before you go, Thomasina, has anyone given you any indication of when you might expect to be... Do you want to move back into your old house? I'm undecided on that at the moment. You know, one part of me says yes, especially with the community being even tighter than ever. But before I even consider returning, or before I think my mind will allow me to feel safe in that place, I need some real assurances that it is indeed safe. And I don't just need a written document saying, oh, I'm telling you it's safe. No, with that, I need to see evidence. I need to see the tests that have been done, the certificates. I need to know when they were done. You know, the water's been tested, great. Was it tested out of my tap? You know, I can't shake the notion that the people that you will be seeking those assurances from, in many ways, will be the same people that told you Grenfell Tower was safe. Do you know, it's funny you pick up on that, because actually the Public Health England, they were at one of our meetings and they were telling us, oh yes, you know, the air quality is okay. You know, London's got bad air quality as it is, but it's okay. And then later it came out that, oh, the way we take the data and we make it sort of, I think it's, was it poor, medium, or healthy, or whatever it was, but nowhere in that was it okay. So, you know, you're not being clear on that. And that mistrust just grows, because every time you look up you have a massive reminder. And how are you calculating this? You know, have you got a sensor on top of the KA school, which is what we were told, and then one in by St Charles or Goulburn or wherever it is, and you're taking a medium, a sort of average
reading to say it's okay. And if that's the case, that's not representative of the air that's directly around the tower, because when you see people walking in there, they've got these masks on. So clearly, whoever cares about those workers recognises that it's not safe enough to put them at risk in that way.
And you need to know what you might be inhaling. Thomasina Hessel, thank you so much. Yeah, and anything you need, you know where we are.
Thank
if you ever need a loudhailer or a platform,
that's very, yeah, thank you.
LBC. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I wasn't taken remotely by surprise by that return to broadcasting live. I don't know what you're suggesting. This is LBC live from the Maxilla Social Club, which sits, as I've said a few times today, but we'll continue to remind you because it's very important to keep this story front and centre. And the more I learn about what's happened in the 4 weeks since Grenfell Tower caught fire, the more I realise how many people somewhere in this city are lurking with their fingers crossed, hoping that the story goes away, hoping that these questions just die down, that the volume diminishes with every passing week, because some of the evidence already collected, some of the questions already posed speak of incompetence on such a scale that whether you're a journalist or a firefighter or anybody who has a professional involvement in tragedy still can't quite compute the scale of this one. But it's been exacerbated. It has, if you like, seen insult added to injury with the paucity of response from the authorities, who simultaneously claim that they've offered every help to the survivors and to people like Thomasina, who you just met, a story that hasn't really been told yet, because focus inevitably has been upon the people who lived in the building itself, but the people on the walkways, the neighbouring buildings, the neighbouring tower blocks have been evacuated as well. Smaller tower blocks have been evacuated as well on safety grounds, and they don't know when or whether they will be able to return, in some cases, in the case of a 3-year-old son, to the only home he's ever known, and still the council refused to talk to us. Make of that what you will. I'm joined now by Pilgrim Tucker, who is a housing campaigner, and indeed was a housing campaigner long before the Grenfell Tower tragedy unfolded. She's affiliated with the Grenfell Action Group, which is itself a member of the Radical Housing Network. And I'm waiting for someone to tell me to calm down and that things aren't as bad as they look. Pilgrim, is that person going to be you?
I really, really, really wish I could tell you that, but I, for the first time, had a break yesterday. Yes. And what's happened here has been relentless. The residents here have had just to deal with so many confusing, enormous things. On a daily basis, they'll be asked to think about really big, impossible sort of decisions. And so I got a few hours break yesterday morning and started, I think, for the first time in weeks, to absorb, and actually think about
rather than just
happened.
Spinning the proverbial plates and trying to keep everything...
and just keeping going and carrying on working.
Yes.
And to be honest, I got really annoyed again.
Yes.
I got really angry again.
Tell me why.
I think this is about the housing thing, and it's like, there are solutions there. Why are they not being done? Why are residents still being communicated with so poorly? It is adding insult to injury, but you can just look at it in a way. The level of incompetence is so poor, they can't even get basic public relations right, so they can't even cover their own backs properly, there's solutions here, and let's see if this new council leader takes any of the steps that are required. No.
Are you aware of her meeting with any of the people that you've been helping?
Well, apparently she did a walk around a couple of nights ago.
Okay.
I heard about her interview on the radio this morning, where she said she'd never been into a tower block before.
Yes.
And the response I read, I haven't heard it myself, it seemed like most people were not impressed by her. She didn't show a huge degree of empathy or will, really, and I think both of those things have been really, really lacking here. Empathy and any will and any feeling that you have to do stuff about this.
What amazes me, you're a volunteer.
I am now, yeah.
So all of the people, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, you're in quite a state, Pilgrim.
I am. I'm really, really tired.
For people who can't see you, you're shaking, you're jittery, you're tearful. You are at the end of your tether. There's nothing left in the tank, and you're not paid. You're not elected.
Yeah.
You're not appointed. You're not charged with caring for any of these people any more than some of the other people we've spoken to today are. And yet the people who are befitting of all those descriptions, the people who are elected, the people who are paid, the people who do have access to the chauffeur-driven Jaguar with the fancy flags waving on the front of it, the people who are charged with caring for this community. But let's just say they're not jittery and exhausted.
I can't believe the complacency of it. It's a total failure on an epic scale. It has been like the third world here, in the richest place in the whole of the UK probably, and these people who have a duty to govern, that is their main responsibility, have just completely failed, and they don't even have the humility or the generosity to these people who are still being failed to admit it and walk away, you know. I mean...
Are they in a sense... Are they being hung out to dry themselves, all of your accusations notwithstanding, by central government? I mean, the problem seems to be that nobody knows where the buck stops.
Well, that's why we need a good public inquiry, yes, because there has been a weak regulatory environment, and there has been encouragement to contract out to private companies who are not well monitored. So although this council here, you know, has failed sort of spectacularly,
yes.
There were other factors aside from the negligence of this council that led to this. There are, you know, it's not just them who are at fault, and that is why we need a good inquiry that allows the voices of the people who have been proven to know absolutely best about what happened. They've been proven right time and time again about the causes of this fire, about the neglect that they've suffered over years and years and years. So let's finally start listening to the nice, ordinary people in this area, rather than the ones who have proven themselves not to care, not to be competent.
And that explains the scepticism surrounding the public inquiry, because people on the ground, people like you as well, close to the ground, don't see evidence of it being independent from and distinct from the sort of governmental structures that many people consider to be responsible for the tragedy.
Absolutely, and you know, it's well known that the Conservative Party has a very close relationship with the private sector, you know, and they will socialise with property developers and big construction companies and so on. So, yeah, there is a feeling that how can this be objective? The Conservative Party, I mean, David Cameron and Michael Gove both live around the corner.
Michael Gove's just moved.
Oh, well, I'm actually not surprised, to be honest. But they will socialise. They have close relationships with the people who are likely responsible here. So, of course...
that's quite a sweeping statement. I mean, you're using two named politicians as an example of a genre, so you speak of a genre of politics.
Yes, I mean of certain social circles and people who live certain types of lifestyles that are completely alien to most of us. And that, I think, in part explains their response to these people, because they just have no idea, like the new council leader who's never been in a tower block.
Yes.
They just don't have an idea what normal people are like, and they don't particularly like them, is what I see.
And then that's a recurring theme from people that live here and from people observing as well. Pilgrim, thank you. You know where we are if you need any more. Can I ask you to do me a favour?
What's that?
Can you have a rest?
I'm going to, yeah.
I mean it.
I literally am.
Because you're not going to be any help to anybody if you carry on that. You've got to just recharge your batteries. All right.
Today's my last day.
God bless.
Okay.
Thank you. Live today from the Maxilla Club, the Maxilla Social Club, which sits just in North Kensington in the shadow of Grenfell Tower, but also, I should tell you, I mean, 300 or 400 yards away from where we went to work every morning at LBC until just a few years ago. It's where I used to live, just over half a mile away, up towards the Harrow Road, for those of you familiar with this area. So the shop fronts, the signages, the buildings, well, they're familiar to me, and yet there's something about the streets now that just has a sense of impermanence to it, a sense of insecurity. And when you speak to people like Thomasina, who's been evacuated from her home nearby, you begin to understand why. This is a community in limbo. It's a community in absolute disarray, and it's being held together by volunteers. That's what I've learned this morning. I don't know how long you've been with us, how much of the programme you've been able to listen to, and I don't care today what your politics are or what your general perspective is. We're talking about humans, we're talking about neighbours and friends, we're talking about people that could quite easily have been us. And the very fabric of their community, the very The stitches of their society are being held in place by volunteers, including the one I just spoke to, Pilgrim Tucker, who I hope I didn't embarrass her by describing somebody clearly at the very, very end of her tether. Because this sense that I have only picked up on since coming down here in person today, the sense that these people have is that if they don't continue doing this, nobody will. Why do we pay council tax? Who do we pay it to? What do we pay it for? All of these people in this part of London, all of them, expecting something and receiving nothing. And still, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea refuse to speak to LBC, or at least to me. If they would, the questions are mounting, aren't they? But top of the list would just be where were you? And where are you? Because they're not here. You heard Zoe earlier begging for footballs. Begging for footballs in the middle of the richest borough in Britain, a borough that just 3 years ago gave £100 rebates to every council taxpayer in the area who had paid their council tax in full. And now children who would be wandering the streets after being thrown out of their temporary accommodation at 10:30 in the morning are gathering around that little corner of this community, and the people helping them are begging for footballs. And they're getting help from all sorts of quarters, including the sort of professional end of the spectrum. Well, they're all professionals, but the legal end of the spectrum. And I spoke earlier to Jolyon Morm, QC, who is a director of the Good Law Project and has again put himself forward and some of his colleagues forward to help the families because they're not getting help from anywhere else. And I asked him at the outset precisely who he's helping and what he is doing to help them. Okay, let us pick them up, if we may, one by one. The families that you're helping recover remains, this is so that they can conduct proper funerals and proper burials. What would be the points of contention? Why would the coroner's office be resistant to that?
I think, there are a whole series of difficulties.
Of course.
And the difficulties are different on a sort of looking at individual cases. But for one family that I worked with, the police were they were doing things in the sort of methodical way that they thought right, but the family were dissatisfied with the speed that the investigation was taking, and ultimately, when we threatened to sue, the police were able to pass over the remains the next day. What you have to remember, of course, is that if you're Muslim or Jewish, it's incredibly important that you be able to bury the remains as soon as possible. And I just had a sense that the police weren't quite striking the right balance. The other type of issue, and perhaps the issue that remains now, is that in many of these flats, the heat was so intense that it really is quite difficult to identify of the material left in the flat what is human in origin. And of course the police are anxious to ensure that they hand over to the right families such human remains as they can identify that are remains of relatives of those families. So it is a complicated picture, and I'm not pointing the finger at the coroner, who by all accounts is deeply affected by what she's having to deal with. But obviously, if you're trying to help a family and the family's anxious to get remains back, you want to make sure that everything's happening as quickly as possible. And there have been some concerns about the quality of information that the police and coroner have made available.
Again, that's probably got more to do with the scale of the problems they're facing than any willful intransigence.
I certainly wouldn't say there's willful intransigence. I think genuinely the difficulty is that the police just want to do things in the way in which they always do, no doubt for generally good reasons. The families want they want to be able to try and start to move forward, and to do that they need to bury the bodies of their relatives.
Yes.
And there's a balancing act between those two issues, and sometimes the police don't quite get that balancing act right, or the coroner doesn't. And so, if you're a lawyer representing the families, it's your job to put your thumb on the scales and try and hurry the police up. And certainly on one occasion, I managed to do that. As I say, we threatened to go to court on the Sunday. The police, which had previously not been giving any information at all, released the body on the Monday. The remaining cases, I think, are more difficult, are genuinely more complex.
I see. The phrase you used was amnesty for people who need help. What do you mean by that?
Well, for organisations who are working on the ground, there is a very, very real issue about undocumented migrants in the Tower, or previously in the Tower, accessing help. So I'm told, for example, that there are people who are injured, but who will not go to the NHS for fear that their details will be passed over to the Home Office. I'm told that the Red Cross and doctors of the world are treating people outside of NHS hospitals because they're too afraid to come forward. Obviously, those people are not able to access offers of new housing. They're not able to access the emergency funding that government and charities have provided, and they're not also going to be able to access the courts for the purposes of suing to recover damages for, the loss of what might be the sort of major breadwinner in the family. The government's response has been poor, frankly. The government keeps saying we are giving an amnesty, but all they've offered really is this. If you give us all of your details now, we promise not to deport you for 12 months. And, an offer to remain in the country for 12 months if you give the authorities the wherewithal to deport you in a year's time is not a desperately attractive offer. And the real problem I have is that what the government is saying to the public at large, we are giving an amnesty, and the effects of that offer on people on the ground, people who are in need of that amnesty, there's a really big difference between those two things. And I suspect if you're an undocumented migrant, you feel like this is some bad joke that government's playing on you.
Or a trap.
Or a trap, absolutely so. And, the other thing is, if you were a tenant in that tower and you were illegally subletting your apartment, so in other words, you no longer had need of it as a tenant yourself, but you used your social tenancy to make money from other people, and so you deprived the council of the opportunity to house those social tenants who were in need, the government have given, certainly in respect of some of the criminal offences, an unqualified amnesty. And I struggle to see how it can be right for government to give an amnesty to those who were really defrauding, in a sense, public funds, the provision of public housing, but not give an amnesty to those who were victims, who may have been injured or have lost relatives, certainly lost their possessions in the fire. I just can't quite understand how government thinks it's right to give an amnesty to one, but not the other.
Indeed. Would it be possible to put a vague estimate on the number of people in the category you describe?
I think we're talking handfuls rather than dozens or hundreds. But of course, it's of the very nature of this class of victim that it's very, very difficult to get numbers. I keep asking those working on the ground to whom I talk whether I might speak directly to undocumented migrants, and what I get back invariably is there is great nervousness even about even for those people speaking to me.
Gosh.
So it's difficult to know. What we do know, because the government, I think, has now made 4 statements on the subject, each sort of giving a little bit more than the previous one did, is that the government recognises there is a real issue here.
I see. And the final branch of the work that you're doing, Jolyon, is the remit of the inquiry. You mentioned that you're sort of exerting or hoping to see it broadened somewhat. What do you want it to do that it isn't currently designed to do?
Well, this has been a rather unhappy story again. It's been a story, again, of mismanagement by central government, because initially when Sir Martin Moore-Bick was appointed, he understood himself to have been appointed to look at very, very narrow terms of reference, just why the fire spread. He told the press that those were the terms of reference that he understood.
It was an exercise in expectation management, really, on his part, wasn't it?
That's right. And what he did was he queued everyone up for what looked like a whitewash in the making. Residents were rightly, I think, very, very angry about that. And now the government has gone back to the drawing board and is now consulting properly in relation to what the terms of reference of the inquiry ought to be. But meanwhile, a lot of damage has been done. Certainly damage has been done in terms of confidence in Sir Martin Moore-Bick. He, rightly or wrongly, is blamed by victims of the disaster for what government initially set up to look like a whitewash. And so, you have to wonder whether he's going to be in a position to recover
what do you think?
Confidence.
What's your counsel? I mean, you say rightly or wrongly. Which one would you pick?
Well, I don't myself see any reason to point the finger at Sir Martin Moore-Bick. It's terribly unfortunate that the pool in which government fishes when it chooses people to chair inquiries is a very narrow pool. There are substantially no senior black judges in the country. The number of senior women judges is very modest. Everyone is an establishment figure by the time they become a High Court judge, and almost everyone comes from Oxbridge, and almost everyone is independently skilled. So you have very, very few people, if indeed anyone, who can communicate to victims that they have some understanding, some empathy of what it feels like to have been let down, very seriously let down by the establishment. And I think unless you have that sense of establishment betrayal, you can't really understand quite how distrusting people have learned through experience to be.
Final question. What would you be looking for soon if we were to perhaps derive some confidence that things are moving in the right direction? What should be the next sort of milestone on the road towards justice?
Well, I think I certainly would want to see the government offering a meaningful amnesty so that everyone who needs help can come forward and access it. I would also very much like to see funds being made available by government to enable residents to appoint a barrister or a team of barristers to represent them in the public inquiry. That seems to me to be the best way for residents to have input into what the terms of reference of the inquiry.
Who would represent them currently?
Well, I think, I hear rumours about people that those individuals are working with. They're working with a whole variety of sets of lawyers. I'm not sure.
So you just want it formalised?
But they need, that's right, they need to be able to speak with one voice. They need to be able to communicate to government, this collectively is what we want out of the inquiry. I think that would help. I also do think that government has to give very serious consideration to asking Sir Martin Moore-Bick to step down and be replaced by somebody appointed in consultation with residents. That's unfortunate if you're Sir Martin Moore-Bick. I don't think criticism of him is well placed or necessarily well placed. But I think the victims have to come first. What they need to recover confidence in the inquiry, I think, ought to be the government's priority.
So even if their reservations are ill-founded, their reservations are significant enough to see you think that change should be effected. That makes sense.
I think that's right. You know, if we don't want another Hillsborough, if we don't want another historic inquiry into child abuse type debacle where we've had now, I think we're on our 4th chair of that inquiry, government does need to recognise that residents, families need to have confidence in this inquiry. And if, even through no fault of his own, Sir Martin Lord-Vick has lost that confidence, I think government needs to address that situation.
That was Jolie Amon QC, the director of the Good Law Project, addressing quite a lot of the legal issues surrounding this story. I conducted that interview earlier. Since then, I've read in the Times today, police estimate fewer than 10 people would fall into the category of those who are believed to have been in the building but haven't come forward because of fears regarding their undocumented status. So fewer than 10 people, which some corners of the media have used to pollute the whole well. But today's not the day for anger at that kind of tactic or criticism of that kind of rhetoric. I'm feeling a little numb, and I'll explain more. My apologies for the slightly disoriented nature of some of the programme's running orders today, but I am live from the Maxilla Social Club in North Kensington. It would have been a club attended, no doubt, by many of the people who died in Grenfell Tower, a tragedy that unfolded 4 weeks ago today, and which continues to pose, this is the thing, isn't it? It continues to pose more questions than it answers. And after 4 weeks, I think everybody, however outraged or confused you were by the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, after 4 weeks we would have expected that situation to have been reversed, that answers were forthcoming, assistance was on the ground. There's a sense of shell-shocked people everywhere you look who just can't quite believe that I mean, certainly the people that we've met, people we wouldn't have met if we hadn't come here to do the programme, because they're too busy. They're too busy trying to look after children. They're too busy trying to help people work out what happens next. My colleague Rachel Venables has been here a lot during the last 4 weeks, and I know proper journalistic objectivity prevents you from indulging in some of the sort of contemplations that I'm allowed to do, Rachel, but I mean, have I described things correctly? Is there still an air in the community that, well, the cavalry just hasn't arrived?
Absolutely. I don't think I've spoken to anyone who's had anything good to say about the authorities' response from the council that isn't, as you heard earlier from Thomasina, about individuals, people much lower down on the rungs who are working absolutely flat out trying to help.
Above and beyond the remit of their duties.
And probably above and beyond what they're paid at the end of every day. Just that's the impression that people are getting. They believe that they were let down before the fire, and they believe that they were let down after the fire. And that's not to take away from, as I say, the hundreds of people working at the council, but it just feels on the ground as though something broke, something snapped at the higher point of the authority that should have happened, and what you saw fill that void has helped immensely, which is the community centre. It's places like the room we're in now. You walk outside, as I know you will have done today, and the walls aren't brick anymore, they're paper. They are covered in notices and pictures and beautiful artwork dedicated to the people killed. And there are also signs, you know, free art classes, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and you know, the children on the green, you know, children can come and play outside that you were talking about earlier. You know, free counselling if you want legal advice, all of these little things that, you know, just an hour a week some volunteer has stepped forward and decided they're going to do. That's the thing that's filled the void, and that's the thing I think it has shown the great side of humanity, and it's also what I think will help a few people get through this who maybe otherwise wouldn't have had this happened in a different community in a different part of the country.
And yet the appetite from local and central government to redress some of this epic injustice again appears to be absent. It leaves us with little option but to credit people like Emma Dent-Coad, the local MP's analysis of the scenario, which is that it's born of a sort of sense of social apartheid, of a sense of snobbery, that the people in this part of Kensington just don't matter, or at least didn't matter until their homes caught fire. And you would have thought that the simple tragedy of their homes catching fire would have been the signal to end their second-class status, but they don't seem to feel that way.
And I think some people feel shock almost that there wasn't more of a plan put in place, that there wasn't a situation that was ready to go, and you say, you know, right, we'll get the army down on the ground. Not necessarily that would have helped, but one person said to me very poignantly, you know, what if an aeroplane hit that tower? What if it went down because of a different reason? Yes. Would there have been more support in place?
What if it was a different tower? What if it was the Shard, perhaps?
All of these questions, and it may well be that nothing would have have changed. It would have been exactly the same. But the people here, on top of the pain of losing their homes, their loved ones, you know, even their school, seeing that awful tower every day, day in, day out, they feel victimised over and over again. It may not be true, as I say, there are so many people working so hard, but that's how people feel, and that is really going to shape how the community recovers in the coming years.
Because it's still reeling, and the process of recovery hasn't actually, this is the thing I've been most surprised by today, it hasn't begun yet, has it?
And I was speaking to a woman, I had another wander around earlier, I've spent so many hours down here.
Yes,
I was speaking to
great work.
Thank you. I was speaking to a woman at the Westway Centre who was just volunteering, and I said, is it letting off at all? You know, are you finding that 4 weeks on people are starting to get back together? And she says, no, you know, it's still really busy, and any day someone can come down there and maybe they want a bit of legal advice, maybe there's a problem, you know, they're trying to get their child into a certain school, maybe they just want someone to give them a cup of tea and a hug. They're still really, really busy. And as we talk about people not being able to recover, I think a big part of that is they can't escape it, because you've got that tower. I don't know what you felt when you first saw it. It still sends a shiver down my spine. It's like being doused in cold water when you see it. It attracts and repels like a magnet almost. You see people walking down the street. Their just eyes are crossing, you know, from left to right, and they see the tower and they stop. You know, it's subtle, but you see it. Or you see people standing there looking up at it, and then they all, it's like a shudder almost. Maybe I'm imagining it. No, and they realise what they're looking at, and there's just like a cloud over the sky, a cloud over the day, and that's in the background of everything that's going on, and that's having a real impact here, I think.
A continuing impact. Rachel Venables, many thanks indeed. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I've just realised for the first time in all the years we've spent together, I haven't taken a single call in the first 2 hours of the programme. I may remedy that in the next hour. I may not. It's entirely up to you. Probably the local, actually, for many of the people who lived in Grenfell Tower, and many of the people who live in the immediate environs, some of whom we've spoken today, none of whom have provided much comfort to the question or much satisfactory response to the question of where the authorities are, the people you would expect to be dealing with this, people who perhaps could have their absence forgiven in the immediate aftermath, given that the nature of the tragedy was so unprecedented. But the contrast between what people living in temporary accommodation, what people who've been shifted into hotels, what people who have lived in some cases in this part of London all of their lives are telling us, and what the council is telling us, the contrast really couldn't be greater, and that's a cause for serious concern. I am, however, minded to break the habit of a lifetime and actually reject temporarily that class-based analysis, that notion that this is, as Emma Dent Code said, and I have to obviously credit Emma Dent Code with having been on the ground here in North Kensington, well, as a councillor and as a resident pretty much all of her life, but certainly since the general election and since the fire began, when she was here in the small hours of the morning, she's barely left, and her analysis is bleak. It's so bleak, I'd like to resist it. Her analysis is that this is about class, this is about second-class citizenship, this is about people somehow beneath the concerns of Kensington and Chelsea Council. And I genuinely mean that when I say to you I'd like evidence to resist that analysis, because it's a heartbreaking analysis. It adds the most profound of insults to the most vicious of injuries that this community is still seeking to recover from. If you think you can provide, if you will, an analysis that doesn't admit the possibility of social apartheid, the possibility of, well, snobbery in its most insidious form being at least part of the explanation of what we've seen unfold in this corner of London, I would genuinely love to hear from you, because right now, and it's partly because I'm reeling from some of the encounters that we've had, and partly perhaps because I don't have the tools that I need to do so. Right now, I can't resist that analysis. It's the only one out there, especially after 4 weeks. 4 weeks and you're still not here? 4 weeks and you're still not talking to the residents or indeed to their representatives? 4 weeks. And people like Matt Rack, the General Secretary of the FBU, and Emma Dent Code, the MP for the area, are still baffled as to where the infrastructure is. I don't know. If you've got an answer to that question that is not as bleak as the one that Emma Dent Code provided, I would love to hear from you on the usual number, 0345 606 0973. But don't worry, there's plenty to get through, including a gentleman that I wish I didn't have to introduce you to now. You may already have met him. It was a call that we took on the Friday after the tragedy, the third day of coverage on LBC, when just before 1 o'clock, Shah rang me to describe what had happened to him and his family on that night. I'm going to remind you of the call, and then I'm going to introduce you to Shah, who's joined me today at the Social Club, but I would warn you, especially if you've got kids in the car or near the radio, that this is, well, I would loosely describe this as the most memorable call I've ever taken on LBC, and not for very nice reasons.
I lost my mother and my aunt in that fire, and I'm sick to death of the lies and cover-ups already started. I got a call from my aunt about 1:30 in the morning that night. She was telling me there's fire and people are dying. Please call the fire people. My mom used to live on the 18th floor, and my aunt was visiting her on that night. And they were helped up by one of the people living on the 23rd floor. He was working also with TMOs. And he was helped up despite danger to his life, and he lost his life over that. And I got a call saying, why isn't anyone helping us? They were given the wrong information. They were told to go back to their flats. I told her, you should listen to what you're told. And
sure.
You know, she said, it's the floor is hot. It's hot. We're going up the floor, and it was the smoke. My mom just keep saying, you know, don't come. I said, Mama, I'm coming. She said, don't come, just call the fire people. As they went up, helped by this Afghan man to take refuge in his flat, I kept on calling them, and I could not hear any sound of fire alarms up to the last minute. I kept telling them to put some sort of wetted cloth over themselves, wet themselves with water so the fire wouldn't affect them. I was trying to keep them calm. And the smoke suddenly got them. I mean, I heard every last breath she took. The smoke got them, and I could hear him wheezing. She couldn't talk anymore. My mom's phone was going.
Why, Shah, mate? I'm so sorry for you. I really am. Why did you use the phrase cover up?
I heard, from what I've heard so far.
Okay.
From what I've heard, that politicians are trying to spend this somehow.
They won't be able to.
Somehow
They won't be able to.
I hope.
They won't be.
James, please don't let them. We don't have much voice in this city. We don't have many journalists which fight for us. I mean, the little people. Please, God bless you. God bless you. You're all we have.
Look, you just take care of yourself. Keep your family close, all right? And don't worry about cover-ups.
I hope not. Nobody helped that night. There didn't seem to be much they could have done. I mean, my aunt was saying, why aren't there helicopters? Why aren't there helicopters? Why aren't there people coming to help us? Why aren't there cranes coming? I mean, I thought I'll wake up in the middle of the night. It's a nightmare that it's not ending.
I'd forgotten the last lines that Shah spoke to me 3.5 weeks ago. It's a nightmare and it's not ending. I wish we were meeting, Shah, in any other circumstances than these. You know that I do, but I have to begin, I suppose, by asking whether or not that description still applies. Is there still a sense that the nightmare continues for you?
The nightmare still continues every night. It's like one never-ending. I do want to wake up from it and think, you know, it's all been a nightmare and it's over. But I'm afraid I come to believe that I have to accept and live with it for the rest of my life. The events were so tragic and so powerful that it seems that it's been tattooed not only on my mind but on my soul. To see that, I'm looking for a way to kind of get away from it.
Yes.
Maybe a justice resolution to all this would be a start. But when I see people kind of trying to kind of not go down deep into what happened and why, because somehow they are kind of limited by the rules that the government might have laid down for them. It does not help me to go over and try to start not an end, but beginning to an end.
The phrase they use in sort of therapeutic circles would be closure, wouldn't it? And you're describing the beginning of that process, and you can't get there yet because nobody appears to be providing any guidance as to what the future might hold.
No. I've tried to be. I've tried to see if I can stop what I see that some sort of a easy way out for the people who have committed this manslaughter, in my view. But I can see that the government, the establishment is against us. What we've seen on the news has not been the whole truth. The news has been managed to reduce the impact to the public. The council, still to this day, has been no help to us.
I'm interested in that because I think as we cover it, I'm not going to have an argument with you, Shah. I know you listen to the programme on a regular basis, but I think, for once, I think we won't step up to the debate. I think what's happened personally when you describe the news being managed and why you feel that way is because the news is incapable of communicating what you feel. The news is incapable of communicating what I feel as I walk around today, what Rachel Venables has felt for the last 4 weeks. I would bet my life that there hasn't been a conspiracy or a deliberate cover-up, but I think listening to your words, I understand why so many people feel that there has, because the news is inadequate to the task. It can't fill in the gaps that you have. It can't provide answers to the questions that you ask, but neither can it actually convey the raw emotion that everybody close to this building, everybody close to this tragedy, has coursing through their veins now. And that's a very, very difficult task for anybody to address, a very difficult challenge for anybody to rise to. What would give you hope that there were processes in motion that genuinely were designed to bring you answers and that dread word closure?
Stopping of deceptions would be a good start. Whether it's from the council, the people involved, and just let whoever is going to be in charge of this investigation, give them the power to go deep in and see the causes and hopefully bring people to book, prosecute.
You don't have much faith in that process, do you, at the moment?
So far not. So far for them, what I've seen, I haven't seen anything that will reassure me that they seriously and honestly want to reach that conclusion, that end, to come out with the truth and prosecute the people who were kind of at fault.
And you appreciate it would be a slow process, but you don't have faith that the process is going to go at all.
I have no faith. I think it's going to be. I fear that it would be another Hillsborough, or you can see how long they go on, and by the time it's finished, a lot of people who kind of were responsible are either no longer with us, or some are retired.
Indeed. And I mean, I can't rise to the challenge of addressing your pessimism, not with what I've learned today and what I've seen today. You'll stay with us for a little longer. I'd like to learn a little more about your mum and your aunt, and some of your other family members as well. I'm joined by Shah, who lost his mother and his aunt in the Grenfell Tower tragedy, a tragedy that we are marking the fourth week anniversary of by broadcasting to you live today from the social club that sits more or less on the same estate, the same grouping of buildings. Shah is the gentleman who called me on the Friday immediately after the tragedy to describe in harrowing terms how he'd been on the phone to his mother and his aunt as the tragedy unfolded, as the fire spread, and he is very kindly and bravely he's here with me now. Have you learnt any more about that night since we last spoke, Shah?
That night, my mother, who was disabled, was helped up 5 floors by a gentleman, Afghan gentleman, named Mohammed Sabr. Try to help them, kind of to put a distance between them and the fire, which was below them at that time, to go higher up into his flat. There were other people in his flat when I called. This gentleman kind of lost his life after helping my mom and my aunt trying to escape the fire. He jumped out. I don't know. He's one of the kind of heroic stories of that night, giving his life to save others. To this day, we don't have a body, we don't have anything, no ashes, no remains, nothing. I don't think we would be getting anything.
Who talks to you about this? Who explains this to you?
We have a police liaison officers, which were kind of, they're good, yes. Trying to sort out the problems we have, giving us the information. They are also limited by what they can do, but the police officers involved, they try to help us. But as for the key workers that were key social worker that was assigned to us, we haven't had much help in that department, because I have a brother who suffers from mental illnesses. He's got schizophrenia and he lives not far from the tower, just literally kind of just down the road from the tower. And he's currently not in the country. Thank God he's not, because if he was, I don't know, maybe he would have been also in that tower that night.
Your mum's that night, yes.
Yeah, and we were told by the Kensington housing officer, I don't know if I can give the name, but that there is nothing they can do in regards of...
Because you don't want your mentally ill brother coming home to a place where he can see the building in which his mother died out of his back window, so to speak.
Exactly. Yesterday I had a call from the social officer, social worker, and she told me that the manager in charge of the case said there's nothing she can do, and we should go back and talk to the landlord, which is Octavia Housing Trust,
and see whether they can do anything to help.
Yeah, and my brother is he has medical needs where he needs to kind of give blood tests every month to be able to get his medications. And the sight of that tower would bring up or create a trauma that is, I fear, because I cannot deal with it. Every time kind of I try to sleep at night, I dread it. I dread going to sleep. I kind of wake up so many times in the middle of the night, kind of, as my wife said, like crazy people looking around. I don't want his condition to get any worse than it is. So we've asked the council, to see if he can be moved, take his apartment and give him another one. And they said there's absolutely nothing they can do. This is the sort of help we get from the council, if you know what I mean.
I do, yes, and there's no sense that they want to help. That seems, you could understand that the on their list of things to get through at the moment, perhaps your brother's situation wouldn't be as high as people who lost their homes that night, but the impression I get from speaking to everybody who's been interacting with some of the council workers, some of the stories are positive, but in terms of the appetite to help, it seems to be grudging. It seems to be that they do the bare minimum only when they have to. And I'd love to hear from the council to put forward the alternative analysis to this, but we keep putting in the requests and they keep getting rebuffed.
We also kind of met Minister for Housing, Mr. Aluk, not long after the tragedy, and he assured us that he would help, and he gave his email. We have emailed him, no response. Sometimes I ask myself, is Old Mina show, and they've managed to get me involved in it, to just show that they're doing something. And I ask myself, isn't it return of the nasty party again? Because I've been through a lot of meetings trying to sort things out. No result, not much result.
You are, I can't imagine what it would be like to lose a parent in such circumstances, and an aunt. But you seem like almost everybody I've met today, the recovery process can't start. It's as if this curious limbo into which the authorities have thrust this entire community condemns you all to this constant cycle of misery and questioning, with no answers and no comfort coming forward. Is that a fair description?
Yes, I kind of have that to deal with. Also, the events and the trauma, yes, which is still live in my head.
Have you had any help? Have you spoken to anybody yourself?
No.
Has anybody offered you any mental health counselling?
I've gone to my GP. She's been very good, yes, trying to give me some antidepressant tablets, which and sleeping tablets. I find it very hard to sleep, but I wake up, I still have to deal with these things. The antidepressant tablets only work after a month or so, yes, I've been told. But it's just going through the trauma, plus having to deal with the problems. Also trying to see that that there's not going to be a cover-up. It's too much.
You're still very concerned about the truth being deliberately suppressed.
That is true. It is, and I'm. It seems that I look at myself and look, that I'm against the authorities trying to win a battle between David and Goliath, if you want to put it that way. We don't have much voice except your show and
and the people that we've met today as well, who are trying to sort of cut. But again, I find it almost unbelievable that it's being done in a vacuum, and it's being done chiefly by people stepping up to the plate uninvited, people taking it upon themselves to speak up for the community. I'm not going to keep. Well, I am going to keep repeating it because it's true. But the people who should be answering these questions are not putting themselves forward to be questioned.
No, they've I've had a call from a good gentleman in Kensington, a psychiatrist, who wants to help me as a kind of as a goodness of his heart, rather than being part of the
infrastructure, the things that we pay our council tax and our income tax in expectation of.
Exactly. The psychiatric help that my GP has asked for in a matter of urgent case, I've been told the appointment is something around the end of August.
So again, you're on hold. You're in limbo. You're in this bizarre hinterland where recovery can't start until some hope of answers emerges, and at the moment that hope is still absent.
And it goes for the rest of the things as well. Whether I need, as a older brother who has to take care of a mentally a brother who's got mental problems and sort out his needs. I'm told to, just go and talk to the housing association and see what they can do. I thought there was a task force sent by the Downing Street to sort these things out.
You've not seen any evidence of it yourself?
I've seen nobody.
I suppose there may be an argument that says they're dealing chiefly with the families evacuated from the building and the environs, rather than the more complicated scenario that you and your brother find yourself in. But it would be nice for them just to tell you that themselves. You've had no contact whatsoever.
No contact.
No evidence of, apart from this housing minister who invited you to email him and hasn't responded to your emails.
No responses.
Charles, thank you for coming down today. I wish there was more we could do to offer you encouragement or confidence. Put Caroline and I in the loop on these dealings with the housing authority and the housing minister, and we'll see whether or not a little bit of media attention perhaps speeds up the processes at all. But can I say something to you as a friend, just as a journalist? I promise you that there won't be. Even if they try to do a cover-up, they won't be able to. I don't personally share your cynicism, your pessimism. I think I probably would if I were in your shoes and you were in mine, but it won't be allowed to happen.
Thank you.
Thanks
very much.
No, thank
God
you.
bless you.
Well, you know where we are if you need us.
Thank you.
A very good afternoon to you. You join me live from the Maxilla Social Club, which sits on the same estate, really, the same development as Grenfell Tower, which I've told you already today. I've seen sort of close up for the first time since the tragedy that unfolded 4 weeks ago. I've been past. I hadn't walked the pavements. You can't get right up across to the building, of course, because it remains sealed off as the investigations continue. Investigations now which have reached a stage where, and sometimes it's the most banal of words that have the most profound of impact, isn't it? And for me, it was oddly enough the use of the word sieve, or the verb sieving, that brought home the painstaking process of what Scotland Yard's disaster victim identification officers are trying to do now. But there are so many different strands to this story, and the more that they unfold, the bleaker the conclusions that the rest of us arrive at become. The only silver lining, and it's a significant silver lining, but the only silver lining of sorts from the whole sorry mess is the behaviour of people on the ground, the behaviour of individuals who've taken it upon themselves to help their neighbours, who've taken it upon themselves to drive the community forward, whether it is Zoe and Cassie, who we met earlier, working with children who are displaying all the signs of trauma, as you'd expect, whether it is residents like Thomasina, who's told us what it's like to be living in a hotel room with her 3-year-old son, and how you cope with a 3-year-old son who wakes in the night describing the horror of believing that his home had gone up in flames, which it hadn't. They've been evacuated because they lived nearby. He'll be embarrassed, I imagine, to be described thus. But Zayad, who joins me now, is somebody else who has sort of just cometh the hour, cometh the man. Talk us through the last 4 weeks, if you would, Zayad, and how you have ended up speaking up for people and representing some of your neighbours and fellow residents.
The last 4 weeks have been, it doesn't seem like 4 weeks. It seems like one continuous day. It's been very difficult to grasp, emotionally drained, physically drained. I've lived in the area for 30 years, and again, I was woken up in the early hours of the morning to the fire, and I mean, looking at it, it's hard to walk away from a situation like that, especially if you've grown up in the area and you love the area, as much as we all do here as a community. And you're right in saying the only light at the end of what is the most tragic situation you can ever imagine was how the community came together. Black, white, brown, Muslim, Christian, Jewish. It doesn't matter in this area anyway, and it never really did. But at the moment, again, that was the only light at the end of the tunnel. The community were always going to be at the council's and government's disposal at a time of tragedy like that. If you love an area, or if you love your home and you love your neighbours and you're strong in your community, there is nothing that, as a community, we could have been asked to do that we wouldn't have done. But the lack of official presence, I mean, even 4 weeks in, it still feels like a bit of a shambles at the moment.
A bit of a shambles, probably a contender for understatement of the century. Everybody that's been here today, everyone who's been kind enough to give up some of their time has described. I still can't quite communicate it or process the absence. I mean, I've explained earlier that when I speak to people like you, my admiration and pride is tinged slightly by the knowledge that you shouldn't be having to do the things that you've done. So when you acknowledged this power vacuum at the heart of the response to the tragedy, what did you do to remedy the situation?
It was just, I mean, again, it's all running on adrenaline at first, so I knew help was needed. I found a local charity, the Clement James Centre, right around the corner from my house, who had opened their gates from the early hours of the morning, and I knew help was needed. I didn't realise to what extent.
Well, you're thinking also at this point, well, we'll do the heavy lifting for a few hours, and then I keep using the word cavalry. I need a better word, but you know exactly what I mean by that. The cavalry will come over the hill, and people like you will be able to, try to rebuild some normality in the area, while the authorities, the invested officials, they get on with the business of governing.
Exactly. So even with that, it was the lack of presence. So after the first, it was about 9 a.m., 10 a.m. when the first firemen came into the church for a coffee.
So they'd have just come off shift.
The scent on the fire brigade, that's when, for me personally, it really hit home. You could smell the smoke from them, and when they say your face can tell 1,000 words, it was really that. Now look, I understand the scale of the disaster. It's hard to have planned for an emergency response.
Yes.
Nobody's in the community thinking it would have been an easy task to respond accordingly. But I think the first day, from about 5 in the morning until midnight that night, we did about 21 hours of sorting aid. There were people driving down from Birmingham, Manchester, South East London, North London.
Just coming to help.
Literally just coming to help. The goodness in people. It was the next day when I'd woken up at about 5 in the morning again to carry on. When it had got to about midday and there was still no support, there was no communication in regards to council or officials sending in lorries to start dealing with the aid. And it was at that point where I realised we're literally going to have to do this alone. And that's what it feels like. I'm talking on behalf of the one centre that I was based at the time for the first few days. But that goes for everywhere. The Maxilla Social Club, the Rugby Club, the Harrow Club. I just realised we're going to have to do it alone. And that's what happened after the 3 days, 4 days. Theresa May then came down to meet with some of the guys that we were working with and some of the residents. But again, it just 4 days too late, it felt like, at the time.
And it was a stage-managed visit as well, I think, for plausible and no doubt sincere security reasons, but it again left people on the ground feeling somewhat overlooked or abandoned.
We mentioned security reasons. Look, people are naturally, when you turn up as the person who runs this country, when you turn up 4 days late, naturally you're going to have members of the public who are a bit irate, a bit angry,
yes.
Who want answers. We were based in a church. The gates were securely locked. There was a heavy police presence within the church and security presence for the Prime Minister. To me personally, I can't speak on everyone that was in the room, but for me personally, the alert, the security risk wasn't high enough for her to have to leave at the time. Okay. And all that did, in essence, was she left at about 6 p.m. and it just meant we couldn't meet again until 12 o'clock the next day. So waking up that morning, we went over to another site.
What changed after her meeting, after her visit? Did anything change on the ground? Anything substantive shift?
After the first visit, or when we went to Downing Street?
So after she came here?
Nothing at all. The next morning, it was exactly the same. We ended up going to the Trellick Tower, which is just off Portobello Road, Goulburn Road, and we had to unload what was actually a fire risk. So the amount of donations without official help or support was actually crammed underneath the old car park, which was... You walk in there and, I mean, there's wires hanging around, and after just seeing what you'd seen 3-4 days ago, you could tell it was a huge fire risk. Again, after our meeting then at Downing Street, that following day, a bit more support was handed over to Westway. But the concerns, I don't feel, were listened to too well.
For example?
As in, a lot of the support was sent to Westway, so some money was sent to the Westway Centre to help some of the families there. It was very cornered off, but there was still a lack of communication. There wasn't a physical presence. Rachel, I was listening in earlier, mentioned, sending the army, and then, in a situation like that, it seems very extreme. But we're not saying, well, we're not thinking just sending the army in full uniform. That causes a bit of, panic, a bit of anxiety for some people. But, there's some people that are very, very trained professional leaders at a time of crisis.
Yes, to impose or to introduce order. And
there's no harm in sending a few plainclothes people with life experience, as in military life experience, to come and help with the organisation, because that's what it was on the ground. I know.
And people have repeatedly described it as looking like a war zone. So
exactly, it's very hard to see how the rest of the country look at it, because I haven't been privileged to see it from the outside. Unfortunately, we've been affected from the inside, so it's hard to see it and understand it how everyone else is seeing it. But the lack of support was...
I think people don't believe it. I think it's not a distrust or a scepticism issue. I think it's too big at the moment, 4 weeks in. I think it's too big a disaster. This response, it's too big an abnegation of duty for people to properly process. It's why they've reached for pat, simplistic and false answers and false theories, because what you describe is almost unbelievable. And I can see on your face, you still can't quite believe it yourself. 4 weeks later, you're still at the front line.
Yeah, look, we have to deal with this daily. Looking at that building every morning, it literally makes you skip a breath.
Yeah.
It's like you're being stabbed in your stomach or in your gut. There's a horrible, horrible feeling to it. To add to that lack of support and care, people... there's no trust in authority within the area at the moment. Now, we're not...
Not through anarchism, but through this sense that we said a load of things and you completely ignored us, and now look what happened, so why would we trust you now?
Exactly. And it's not even just that. The initial response to the situation, you've instantly broken trust. There's a situation where you have people who are very fragile at the moment, who, as you mentioned, are already lacking trust due to concerns being ignored previously. But then your initial response to the situation, all that did was just confirm the distrust in the area, and that's very, very, very difficult.
How do you rebuild it?
I think it starts within the community. I think we all need to remember, I've said personally, I've never been more proud to be from this area in my life.
I get that.
Seeing everyone come together and realising that, I know it's 4 weeks in, however, we've dealt with the situation better than most. And the situation has been dealt with incredibly, considering, as you mentioned before, we're not trained to do this. We're not trained in emergency management. This is just genuinely the everyday people of our community who have come together. And I think the way we need to go forward from that is carry on building that strong bond between not just the Grenfell residents or the Lancaster West residents, but also the wider community who were there at a time of need when government and the council were not there.
You're giving me some confidence, Zainab, that will happen. You're giving me some confidence that if people like you remain involved in that kind of coalescing of responsible people, caring people, could actually constitute significant progress.
And we'll make sure that we are doing it. The Justice for Grenfell campaign is trying to really form the bigger umbrella to help out with the groups that have formed at the moment. But again, it will take people like myself and the hundreds of others, but we need strong speakers, and we need unity. The more we air our views professionally, and again, it's not, when I say start in the community, it's not an excuse to go round and start kicking up and rioting, because that's the worst case scenario in a situation like this, to be honest. I think we're a lot more powerful when we stay peaceful. We're a lot more powerful when we stay together. And I mean, going forward, that's the only way we can really, really get out of the situation as one. And then that spreads on across to the country. So everyone else who'd be listening would also say the same thing. You know, the way we have volunteers here that are putting in their own time for local community centres, do that in your own areas. Don't wait for a tragedy like this to happen before you start acting and before you start coming together as one. We need to really focus on the bigger picture of social housing within the country, and it all goes down to the community. I think if we come together as communities, that's how we start this.
And yet it can never be a substitute for the government. It's a simple word to employ that should have been in evidence here, and I'm afraid still isn't. And I can't quite believe I keep saying those words. Zainab, thanks ever so much for coming down. I really appreciate it. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to invade Sheila Fogarty's programme briefly, so I'll stay with you until about 5 minutes after 1. Sheila's, of course, been covered by Majid this week, and I'm sure he'll understand, because I remain at the Maxilla Social Club in North Kensington, where any sort of slightly naive hopes I had of coming away from this morning's programme reassured that things were finally moving in the right direction after the Grenfell Tower tragedy have been summarily and completely destroyed. I'm joined by some more guests now. Gemma and Eve are campaigners in the issue and in the area, and I think it's worth pointing out you were campaigners before this tragedy occurred, because some of the trends, some of the tides that we've heard described, phrases like social cleansing, phrases like a sort of class-based aloofness coming from Kensington and Chelsea Council, you particularly, Gemma, have been supremely unsurprised to see this emerge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I believe that Grenfell is the result of treating people as less than human. The social cleansing of the area is very apparent to the people who live in the area, and it's been going on for a very long time.
How does it work? What do you mean?
Well, they've been starting with the managed decline of the housing estates, and you yourself has experienced how the council don't respond. And this is what's been happening to the residents for many, many years. They don't respond. They don't have any maintenance, any improvements. They consistently ignore people and their requests. They threaten them with legal action when they speak up, as you know, with Eddie.
This is Eddie who wrote the Grenfell Action Group blog.
Yes, many blogs over many years.
And was threatened with legal action by the council, who continue to refuse to appear on this programme.
Yeah, and his voice is not alone in that. No. Many people have been, and the council work hand in hand with the Westway Trust in this social cleansing, with the Destination Westway and with the council's regeneration READ social cleansing programmes. And we've seen that in the community, the asset stripping of places like Maxilla Nursery, which you're right next door to. At the moment, North Kensington Library, the Isaac Newton Centre is now a private school. The North Kensington Library want to be a private school. They're also taking over parts of this new library, which I might add, only one floor of that building is actually going to be a library, but the way they represent it in the media is, oh, we're building you this wonderful brand new library, but that's really, really far from the truth. It's one floor of a library, 2 floors are going to be privately leased out, and that's something that's been going on in this area for a very, very long time.
And yet it's a very, very wealthy borough, Eve, so people on the outside perhaps who should be quicker to believe these appalling pictures that you're painting will be thinking, well, no, and if it was a poorish council that desperately needed to raise money, I could imagine why they'd be undertaking some of these practices, but they've got £300 million in the bank.
Yeah, they do. They've got £300 million in the bank, and they're really proud of that, and they've worked really hard to give rebates to top rate payers. I mean, I think that tells you everything you need to know. But there's 2 things about that argument that we really need clear, is that one, austerity isn't at work here in the RBKC. We are not in the rest of the country. We have a massive surplus. We take more business receipts than we could spend. So the idea that this is austerity in a material sense is wrong. It's austerity in an ideological sense, absolutely, but it's not austerity because we have a shortage of cash, and that 300 million is cash reserves, so that is not the capital assets of wealthy added in. It's cash reserves. So there's that to be said about austerity.
Yes.
I was going to say something else, but I've blanked.
That's quite all right. Don't worry, it happens to me all the time. I've got the travel news to cover my embarrassment when it does. The phrase social cleansing is a very loaded one. If I've understood you correctly, and we are very short of time, Gemma, it is the idea that you just make it a place where people can't or don't want to live anymore, and then you can carve it up and flog it off to the highest bidder.
Partly that, also partly if you take away everywhere where the community communes and meets up, you are already dispersing them. And then if you have these regeneration plans where they've actually taken out the guarantee that people can return to their homes once the regeneration has happened. So they've stripped all these kind of meeting places and these social hubs so that people don't have places to gather and discuss this. They don't facilitate any kind of meetings where people actually have a meaningful input and say. They just dictate this toxic word, as Eve said, consultation. I went to the Maxilla consultation. We sat down and they dictated that it was being closed. And the people who worked at the nursery had to reapply for their jobs, so they couldn't do anything.
Well, at least I suppose the light is now shining on this corner of London, albeit for all the wrong reasons, and things like this won't be able to be hidden in the darkness anymore. Thank you both very much indeed. I'm going to finish by chatting to Joe, who I met for the first time at about 9 o'clock this morning when I wandered into the Maxilla Club. And I've never met you before, Joe. You're the manager here, or one of the.
I run this with my dad.
You run the place with your father, so you've got this part of London in your veins.
I'm born here.
The reason I mention that I haven't met you before is I don't know what you normally look like, but today you look like a man who is, again, like a lot of people I've seen today, close to the end of your tether.
No, not really. It's just we've been doing 7 days a week here.
What have you been doing, mate?
It was a place for people to come for tea and coffee. Then it was a drop-off centre. Now it's a meeting place.
I should add, you're so close to the tower, you could have smelt the smoke from here.
I live next door.
Right.
So, but it's just a place that they can meet. There's no hostility here or anything else. It doesn't matter about money or colour or anything like that. And as I say, they're having their meetings here now and everything else. We had 4,700 boxes donated here.
Just because you're here? I mean, do you understand how you've ended up as Zayad, who we met earlier?
We didn't have no choice, to be truthful. We opened at 2 o'clock that morning for teas and coffee, then became a drop-off centre. We had 100 volunteers a day.
So and you're just keeping the ship afloat with. I mean, where is the council?
They ain't.
Do you?
We appealed on the radio every time. That's how we got boxes, bands, volunteers.
You're all right.
That was it.
Nothing. So you call in vain for help from the people that we all presume are there.
Well, we're a self-funding club, so we're running at a loss, but that doesn't matter. That's nothing to do with it. But no, we haven't had nothing from the council. No help.
I'm going to just take a little more of Majid's show. I'm sure he won't mind. Tell me a bit about this area. Tell people who don't know North Kensington. You've lived here all your life. You're clearly still a spring chicken. You're a mere slip of a lad. Give me an idea of why people feel
just came together. Everybody came together. Nobody refused to do anything. They felt helpless with the fire. It's still emotional. It's still raw. But they all came. I mean, my parents were here. They were doing 12 hours a day, and they're in their 80s. My son's in his 18, so my wife was there.
Right across the generation, the whole family putting a shoulder to the wheel because no one else did.
No, you had no choice. It's morally you wanted to do it. You want to help people, but we had people coming from every area anyway. It wasn't just this area, but. Even now, you know, you're still getting people wanting to know. I mean, we've got a fun day now. We had a fun day 2 weeks ago to get the kids' minds off of it. We've got another one on the 23rd. We'll have face painting and that, and the kids enjoy it.
Of course. Of course,
So-
and again, it's just this attempt from people who live
And they're
there.
all self-funded by
I hear you.
the community.
I hear you. We've run out of time. In fact, we ran out of time 8 minutes ago, but nobody's counting. Joe Mayhew, thank you. Joe, thank you so much. You've been listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time now is 6 minutes after 1.